What happens when a horror movie stops being scary? Can it still be called a masterpiece? That was the only question I couldn't shake after watching Nosferatu. And honestly, I wasn't scared, not once. I wasn't deeply invested in the characters either. Most of the time, I wasn't wondering who would survive. I was wondering something much simpler. What does Count Orlok actually want? If you watch Nosferatu for the first time today, there's a good chance you'll ask yourself the same thing, which creates a strange contradiction. How can a horror movie that barely scares modern audiences still be considered one of the greatest horror films ever made? At first, I thought the answer was obvious. It's old. It's silent. It's one of the first vampire movies. Maybe that's enough. But the more I thought about it, the less that answer made sense. Because history is full of movies that came first. Most of them have been forgotten. Nosferatu wasn't. So why this one? What did it do that cinema never stopped talking about? The answer surprised me, because I don't think Nosferatu became legendary because of its vampire. I think it became legendary because it changed the way horror works. And to understand that, we need to stop asking whether this movie is still scary. Instead, we should ask a different question. What did Nosferatu teach horror that horror never forgot? That's where this story really begins. Let's start with the obvious. Count Orlok. At first glance, he doesn't look anything like the vampires we're used to. He's not elegant. He's not charming. He's not mysterious in the way Dracula usually is. There's nothing seductive about him. Instead, he looks sick. A bald head, sunken eyes, long fingers, sharp teeth that look closer to a rat than a human. And I think that's intentional, because Orlok isn't designed to tempt people. He's designed to make you uncomfortable. He's less like a person, and more like a disease that somehow learned to walk. The interesting part is that he barely behaves like a traditional villain. He doesn't spend the movie explaining his plans. He doesn't manipulate everyone around him. He doesn't even seem interested in power. He simply arrives. And death follows. That completely changed the way I looked at him. I stopped seeing Orlok as an evil mastermind, and started seeing him as something much more unsettling. A force. Like a plague, or a natural disaster. Something that doesn't hate you. Something that doesn't even know you exist. It simply spreads. And once I started thinking about Orlok that way, another detail suddenly became impossible to ignore. Because every time he appears, the movie keeps drawing your attention to something else. Not his face, not his body, his shadow. That shadow might be the most important character in the entire film. Think about it. One of the most iconic images in horror history doesn't even show the monster. It shows his absence. A shadow slowly climbing the stairs. A hand stretching across a wall. No jump scare. No loud music. No sudden movement. Just the feeling that something is getting closer. Today, scenes like this feel familiar. Almost predictable. But that's only because horror has spent the last 100 years copying this exact idea. Before Nosferatu, fear usually came from seeing the monster. After Nosferatu, fear could come from waiting for it. That sounds simple, but it completely changed the language of horror, because your imagination will almost always create something scarier than any special effect. And that's why this scene still works. Not because it's terrifying, but because it understands something horror films still rely on today. Suspense always comes before fear. But the shadow isn't the only thing that follows Orlok. The film keeps showing us another image. Again. And again. Rats. At first, the rats just seem like background detail. Something added to make the city feel dirty. But the more I watched, the more they felt intentional. Orlok never arrives alone. He arrives with ships. With coffins. With rats. And then, people start dying. That's why I don't think Orlok is simply a vampire. I think he's the physical form of an epidemic. He doesn't conquer cities. He infects them. That's a very different kind of horror. Because you can't negotiate with a plague. You can't convince it to stop. It doesn't care who you are. It treats everyone exactly the same. And maybe that's why the movie never felt like a battle between good and evil. It felt like watching people desperately trying to survive something much bigger than themselves. Which also explains something that confused me the first time I watched it. Orlok doesn't really have a goal, at least, not in the way modern villains do. He isn't trying to rule the world, he isn't chasing revenge, he's simply following his own nature. Just like fire burns, or the sea floods, or disease spreads. And once I accepted that, the ending suddenly made much more sense. Because the film was never building toward a final battle. It was building toward something much quieter, and much more symbolic. And that's what finally answered the question I had from the very beginning. Why doesn't Nosferatu feel scary anymore? The obvious answer would be, because it's old. But I don't think that's true. I think it feels less frightening because we've already seen its ideas over and over again. The shadows. The silent monster. The slow build of tension. The feeling that something is coming long before it actually appears. Today, those are horror clichés. But in 1922, they weren't clichés, they were discoveries. That's the strange fate of truly influential movies. The more successful they become, the more ordinary they eventually seem. Because everyone else starts borrowing from them, until one day, the original feels familiar, not because it copied others, but because everyone else copied it. Which brings us back to the question we started with, can a horror movie still be a masterpiece, if it no longer scares us? I think the answer is yes. Because fear was never Nosferatu's greatest achievement. Its greatest achievement was changing the grammar of horror itself. It proved that fear doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes, it comes from anticipation. It proved that a shadow could be more powerful than a monster. That silence could be louder than music. That atmosphere could be more terrifying than action. And maybe that's why I wasn't scared. Not because Nosferatu failed, but because it succeeded so completely, that an entire century of horror grew out of its ideas. We don't watch Nosferatu to discover where horror is. We watch it, to discover where horror came from, and maybe, that's far more interesting than being scared. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support the channel and lets me make more videos like this. Now I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think Nosferatu deserves to be called a masterpiece? Why or why not? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, don't miss my previous video about Charlie Chaplin's classic film, The Kid. It's one of the most influential films in cinema history, and if you haven't seen that video yet, just click the one on your screen now. Thanks again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.